Welcome to the JD Power AI and Insurance podcast, where we explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping the way insurance companies are serving, growing, and innovating. I'm your host, Michael Vermillion. Our guest today is Michael Reed, founder and CEO of Enterprise Site. Michael has built his career helping complex organizations and now insurers go from pilots to strategic, scalable AI solutions. He's led AI transformations in finance, supply chain, and cybersecurity, and his mantra is simple: pick the right problems, scale with intention, and manage your ecosystem with discipline. In this conversation, we'll explore Reed's proven three-stage model, learn how insurers can avoid common pitfalls, and get actionable guidance on building a future-ready AI strategy. So let's dive in. Michael, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
So just to kind of start, why don't we just begin with what motivated you to found the company, and then we'd love to hear a bit in terms of how Enterprise Site helps organizations move beyond experimentation into strategic AI adoption.
Great. So my motivation for starting Enterprise Site was really around being in large enterprises for the last couple of decades, helping them adopt new technologies and helping them to take advantage of those transformations in a meaningful way and deliver real ROI advantages to that technology. So I left the finance and banking industry most recently to start Enterprise Site, and taking the lessons learned from doing that in large enterprises across multiple industries is why we founded Enterprise Site. And Enterprise Site is really helping organizations adopt AI technology in a meaningful way without kind of getting involved in the hype, and really applying it to real world solutions and ROI for their business.
Thanks for that. So we want to kind of double click now on your methodology and your approach. So let's start with this concept of, it's just super important to choose high impact AI use cases first when you're first getting going. So why is that so critical, number one? And then what do you think that would look like in an insurance context where pilots are often proliferated and just indiscriminately across the organization?
Yeah, that's a really great question, in the sense that I see a lot of enterprises looking for how do we adopt AI, or questioning how do we adopt AI, or challenging what are the use cases for AI. And I always try to help them understand that it's not technology looking for a solution. You need to focus on what is the problem that you're trying to solve. What is the impact you're trying to do? And is the technology applicable to that problem? And I think that's what's really important when you start thinking about high impact use cases and what you're trying to do. Is what are the challenges that you're seeing in your organization? And where does a technology like AI really help you take advantage of that and apply that? And I think that's where you need to look at it, is where are those use cases where the technology is the appropriate approach to that particular problem. And particularly in insurance, one of the big challenges that a lot of insurances are running through is really around managing data. And they have lots of data. Some of it's structured, some of it's highly structured, which is great. Some of it's unstructured data too. And trying to make sense of all of that together is really where AI technology can come into play and really help you take advantage of that technology. So looking at use cases where you have large volumes of data that's hard for individuals to process on a regular basis or at speed, where volume of processing that data you can take advantage of using some of these technologies, and identify where is that creating bottlenecks within your workflows, within your business process automation, and target those areas first, because that's where the technology will have the biggest impact to what you're trying to do.
So I think a lot of companies are at a stage where they're piloting some programs, and they've got some projects running, but moving from one or two AI projects to scaling them up to enterprise-wide adoption is where I think a lot of companies fail. So what are the biggest management obstacles that companies, and in this case insurers, would face in scaling these pilot programs, and then how do you recommend overcoming those obstacles?
That's a fun challenge, and I almost take it back to the first question you asked me about high impact use cases. If you haven't picked the right one in the first place, you're going to have a really hard time. And that's what we've seen with a number of the pilots that various enterprises have started. Is they've started pilots, but they weren't necessarily the right use case or the right impact use case. And that creates a challenge when you start to even try to implement that in a production environment, because you're not really getting the benefits. The biggest challenge management runs into is, one, picking that use case, and two, when you start to design the solution for that use case, is doing it in a way that's not introducing risk to the organization, is not worrying about adoption concepts with your staff. So you're not trying to retrain, you're not trying to get them to do something different. What you're trying to do with a lot of these high impact use cases is automate some of the things that you're already doing every day and making it easier, faster, simpler for your staff, for your environment, for your work process, so that it doesn't introduce more risk. You're doing it in parallel with what they're already doing today, not to them. And that's the biggest problem with pilots, is people get excited about the pilots, they're doing the pilots, they see some value in the pilots, but fundamentally, it's a change in what they're doing today. And that's not necessarily something they're comfortable with. And that becomes a big barrier to, how do I get comfortable with doing it differently? And then what if it goes wrong? I don't have the tried and true method to fall back on. I can't blame the process because I went and did it, and those kinds of things. So those are the big challenges with taking something that is new and shiny, like an AI pilot, and trying to make it productionized, is because it wasn't architected in a lot of cases from the get-go to make sure that you already have a plan on how does this work with your existing processes, your existing workforce. How does this minimize the risk for adoption? How does this minimize the training and up-leveling of any of the people that are involved in the process? And how do you include them in that process as you're going from the pilot into the production side of the house? If you haven't done that all the way through, then you're going to hit a barrier where, yeah, that was a nice, fun pilot, but I'm going to go back and do my job now.
Exactly. I want to turn to this concept of an AI ecosystem and just talk a bit about the complexity and the issues that brings. So, once you're using multiple AI tools, you now have an ecosystem, and then the complexity of that ecosystem can potentially skyrocket on you, get out of control. In your work, you emphasize vendor diversity and also owning your data. So how should insurers be thinking about that in terms of just when they're designing their AI and their data architecture? How do they maintain control of their data, and how do they avoid vendor lock-in?
Yeah, I think this is where you get to that. We've talked about kind of the early part of this around picking the right use case, thinking about what is kind of the adoption strategy. How do you minimize risk for that use case as you're starting to look at how to deploy that into your organization. The same thing applies at the beginning when you're thinking about that, is what is the strategy? What is your overall approach to this AI technology that you're bringing into the organization? And particularly, what are some of your guiding principles that you want to do? And I'll be very, very clear, is one of the strongest things that we learned across any enterprise is their data is their gold. That is the value that they have. And that is true no matter where you are. So in insurance, it's your data. It's all about the information that you have about your customers, about your products, about your services, about your performance. It's all your data. That's your value. And it doesn't matter what solution or what technology it is. Don't be surprised that they're after your data. So you need to think about, when you're adopting any technology or thinking about any vendor, is who owns the data? Am I giving them my data? Am I getting an advantage to giving them my data? And if I'm not, there's no reason to give your data. You should never give your data away. You should always own and control your data. And look for solutions that help you take advantage of your data that you already own and control. So you want to look for AI solutions that help emphasize the ownership and control of your data, because that's your value really when you're going forward. Anything that you're going to be giving that away, is you should immediately start questioning whether you're doing that. And when you look at some of these bigger solutions that we've kind of adopted over the years, they have your data. And that's a big challenge because you can't move to another vendor.
Right.
Because transitioning from that vendor to another vendor is you got to take the data out of one vendor and put it into another vendor. Not helpful. It's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of pain for no benefit. So think about that as you're starting to kind of move forward in AI technology, because data will be what's important. And the control and access and exchange of that data between entities is going to be what AI is going to facilitate and take advantage of. So that's the key when you're thinking about vendors, when you're thinking about all that, have that principle around, I need to own and control my data. When I look for a solution, I want to make sure that that solution solves a problem, but doesn't necessarily lock me into that particular vendor. Because I'll tell you, in another month or two, or maybe even the next hour, there's going to be somebody else that has a solution to that problem that's better, faster, cheaper, easier to use. And if you can't easily plug that solution into what you're trying to do and take advantage of that new vendor or that new software or that new technology, you're going to slowly get stuck behind. And that's part of the problem with AI. AI is changing so fast. Technologies that we're doing today is going to be different tomorrow. And if you haven't built a framework or an approach to that I can plug and play kind of as technology increases to solve the problem better without massive transition or transformation capabilities, you're not going to be able to take advantage with the leapfrogs that are happening in the technology today. You're going to get stuck with whichever one you picked.
I'm wondering if you have any kind of examples from your experience of where vendor lock-in really kind of proved to be detrimental. I'm just thinking about some of the work we've done in the call centers, and how the call center software players are pretty dominant and kind of control the data and make it very difficult to kind of adopt new solutions. But
call centers are a personal background for me, just because I've been involved in building so many of them over the years. It's been quite an experience. But you're exactly right in the sense that same thing with technology. I mean, in call centers, we've struggled with on-premise versus cloud. We've struggled with hybrid. We've struggled with soft phones, versus hard phones, versus all these kinds of different things. There's technology that's constantly changed, which has really impeded enterprises' ability to constantly be able to upkeep and take advantage of that. We're even seeing that now, where we're starting to add agent capabilities. We're starting to add multi-channel capabilities that are handled by AI systems and things like that are helping augment, augment the customer service agent in this case, and allow for greater productivity. But some of those are only available when you move to cloud type services like the Ring Centrals and the Talk Desks and some of these kinds of things. And they don't necessarily work and aren't compatible with some of the on-premise hardware and don't work as well with that. And so you start looking at, I've got to upgrade, I've got to change this, which is very disruptive in the technology. And so these are where you've got to start thinking about how do I plan that kind of migration strategy when you're dealing with the call center. And to your point is, you want to be careful. I'm not moving my data from one to another just to take advantage of some of these agent capabilities, because they have the data. You need to get them to be able to work with the data that you own and control and collect. And that includes things like call recordings. That includes all of those kinds of environments, because when you start thinking of things like HIPAA compliance, you start thinking of things like PCI, you start thinking about all those kinds of different things. From a regulatory perspective, you need to be in control of those environments. You don't want to be outsourcing those environments to a third party, in this case, like a call center, software provider, or whatever else, where they're trying to do that. That's always going to be problematic, and you're never going to keep pace with the technology. And the technology is changing very, very quickly. We're seeing some really, really great agent stuff come out now in the call center space, which is absolutely wonderful.
So now more important than ever. Earlier you had mentioned guiding principles, and I think one of your guiding principles is vendor diversity, which we touched on. Other ones I think include integration and efficient management. So how could insurers apply these guiding principles in their planning and governance practices for AI?
Yeah, I think that's from a governance perspective, that's absolutely critical. So you think about that from your vendor management perspective. You want to make sure that you're not getting stuck in any one particular vendor technology or with one particular vendor, that they're not controlling your ecosystem, that you have good controls in that place, like we just talked about with some of the regulatory issues around call recordings and PCI and HIPAA compliance and some of these other things that you see. You need to make sure that you have control of that process, which means you have control of the underlying data. You have control of all the reporting capabilities. You're not relying on vendors to do that. You can use vendors to help augment that, make that easier, make that simpler, make that more automated for you. But ultimately, you own the responsibility. So you need to make sure that you have that control in the governance process around that, so that as you're managing that, that's your process. It's not a vendor's process. This is another thing that I talk about. For years, enterprises have used application software to help them define their own business processes. And that's the same mistake that we're seeing with a lot of these AI solutions that are coming out right now, is they're adopting the AI vendor's process as their own business process. And that is a big challenge, because now you are building your process around a vendor, as opposed to what is the best business process for you as an organization, and what are the vendors that help support and enable your business process versus adopting their business process. And just like we had with other enterprises, you end up with hundreds of applications that aren't really integrated, all controlling your business processes. And that becomes a very difficult thing to manage, to govern, to provide kind of that controls around. So that's kind of my challenge when I throw out there is really think about, don't design your business processes around your vendors. Get your vendors to help support your business processes.
Yeah, and I think we had discussed in a previous conversation that one of the mistakes that companies can make with AI is to wait for their data to be perfect before they start moving with AI. So what's your coaching there?
Yeah, so that's a classic thing I hear from a lot of people is my data's not ready for AI. And one of the arguments I make for them is, well, AI will help you get your data ready for AI. You don't want to be thinking about how do I make my data ready for AI? What you should be using is how do I take AI and understand how to manage and control my data so I can leverage it better. And a great example of that is, looking at like in the insurance industry specifically, is you've got a ton of, let's say, like claims data. It's a great example. You can bring all of that data in, and you can use AI to give you all kinds of patterns across that data. And you can kind of see what all that information is very, very quickly. What are the patterns? What are the patterns that resulted in good results? What are the patterns in bad results? All that kind of information. And it allows you to then not only understand your entire history of that environment, but then you can also model that and then apply, here's a new claim. Which pattern does this fit or not fit? And start to predict what is the best outcome that I should use based on what is the patterns that I've seen before with this situation. And that allows you to then start to develop capabilities that you never thought you had before. And you did that not by preparing your data for AI, but by using your AI to further understand your data and what you could leverage across that. We've seen that in finance industry too, where they started mining transactions and looking for customer patterns to develop risk around that. We did that in supply chain management, where we looked across supply chains and looked at mapping that to what is a healthy supply chain versus a non-healthy supply chain, so that you could develop credit risk around financing and supply chains for trade. So you can start to look at your data as, how do I use AI to help me understand, manage, and control my data better, where I don't have insights into it today?
So just to build on that, Michael, I think the insurance industry has been using machine learning for a while. I know machine learning is kind of a subcategory of AI, but with the large language models and the other kind of recent advances, what's going to be different just in terms of what AI can bring to the table in terms of recognizing patterns and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so traditionally, a lot of the machine learning models were based on highly structured and understood data. And that's a great advantage. And what we're seeing now is the newer tools, particularly with some of the large language models and some of the other tools that we have, is we can start to create highly structured data from unstructured data. And I think that's where it gets powerful, because now you can use that to not only make sense of your unstructured data, but turn your unstructured data into highly structured data that then allow you to see the patterns, because it's hard to detect patterns in unstructured data. You need highly structured data to get patterns that you can then build models against. And that's the data journey that really becomes powerful for organizations to start to transform themselves, because they take what was data that they couldn't do much with, they can turn that into highly structured data. Once it's in highly structured data, then we have all the ML tools that we've been using for decades to start turning that into models that help drive our business. And that's also what's important to go to the next step, which is about the agents. We're talking about everything about agents right now. Agentify, blah, blah, blah. That's the big thing that's out there right now. To build effective agents for any enterprise, you need that agent to work against highly structured data. If not, the agent's going to be wrong. And that's a liability and a risk for the organization you can't afford. Think about it. Even in the call center space, we used to do this with IVRs, which I love, in the sense that, it's kind of press 1 for this, press 2 for that, press 4 for that. We got that, right? But at the same time, what that does is it's going through a tree to get down to a decision about what is the right response that I need to give to this user. Right? And that response has already been vetted by legal, by risk, by everybody else in the organization, and it's already canned. It's a defined response, whether it's a text field or it's a voice output or whatever else that you're relaying back. It's how do you get to what do I tell the customer? But it's already an approved response. Now what we're doing with call centers, if we're doing it right, for example, is we're taking agents that take a natural language question in from the consumer, and their only job is to interpret, does that question match one of five of my approved responses? That's all the agent needs to do. It doesn't need to make up the response. And that's the problem that a lot of companies got into. And we saw horror stories around that with airlines and other things. We had McDonald's rolled out their agent in their drive-thrus and it was cussing at them and things like that. So, that's the problem, is agents need to be able to respond with highly structured data. Just like in the call center, it's like you get to pick one of five responses. You don't get to think about the response. You just need to match the question to which of the five you're allowed to say, And that's the kind of the same thing that you look at when you start to agentify other things, is you need to get that highly structured data so that the agent is responding with the highly structured data. It's not thinking. It's not doing anything else. It's just matching. I had a question. Which of my responses is appropriate for that question?
I think that's a great illustrative example. So Michael, we like to finish up these conversations by looking ahead and looking into the future. On a lot of topics, we're looking 3 to 5 years ahead. I think with AI, that might be 3 to 5 months. But as AI adoption matures, what does a future-ready insurance organization look like, especially when it comes to their strategy, their governance, and their operational readiness for AI?
Yeah, that's great, and I agree with you. Months, maybe years, but we're definitely in 3 to 5 is way too far. I think we're going to see 1 to 2 years is where probably the sweet spot is. That organizations really need to be thinking about, because the technology is just advancing literally days and hours. It's quite crazy. It seems like every day I open up and I've got something new that's come out. That's not just a small change; it's a giant leapfrog in advancements, and it's quite interesting. But yeah, I think where things are going is is something that I've been pushing quite a bit, which is really, we talked briefly about this kind of agentic world. And I think where enterprises need to start looking at is how do you take your business processes and agentify them so that you're exposing what you are as a business as an agent out to the world. And the reason why I'm saying that is because what we're seeing is we're starting to see that instead of B to B, we're starting to see B to A. And then we're going to start to see B to A to A to B, which means instead of B to B type interaction, you're going to have agents on both businesses that talk and interact and be able to do transactions regardless of what's going on, and it's all automated. And in order to do that, you've got to be able to expose what are the core parts of your businesses as an agent out so that other businesses can find them, interact with them, and consume your services very transparently. And that's going to be very, very powerful because if you think about it, even from your perspective as a business, you want to be able to go out and say, I need this service. Who is the best one that can provide that? And can I consume it right now based on my parameters that I have? And that's what we're seeing where this is going. And we're already starting to see some businesses that have been able to do that. And what we're going to see that is in a business to business context first. And then where it's going is going to be into the business to consumer context. And we're going to see the same thing where you're going to see the business to the agent to the consumer, where consumers start having agents that act on their behalf. Who can provide the best insurance for me? Who can process this claim the best? Or who can do this particular function the best? And be able to have their agent go out and do that for me. Can you submit this claim for me? And gather all the information, pull it from my health records, or pull it from this, or pull it from that, or send in, all the pictures and send in my contractor quotes and send in everything else like that, and have agents on the consumer side that are doing that to submit claims or to find out who's got the best insurance for this type of parameter, do I need an umbrella policy because of my assets have reached a certain threshold or whatever else, and start to have agents on the consumer side that are out there looking for businesses that can provide the services that they need in an agent to agent interaction. That's where I think we're going. That's what I'm already starting to see happen. And that's really starts with enterprises being able to agentify their business processes and be able to provide their services in a way that they can be consumed initially by other businesses and eventually by consumers.
Michael, that was terrific. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
That was an insightful journey with Michael Reed, one that moved beyond tools into true strategic transformation. We learned how to start with impact, scale with care, and govern with control. 3 steps any insurer can follow to accelerate AI adoption. If today's episode resonated, make sure you subscribe to the JD Power AI and Insurance podcast and share it with your executive team. I'm Michael Vermillion, and we'll see you next time as we explore more ways AI is rewriting the insurance rulebook.